This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Welcome, everybody. You are tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. We are at it, man. So close. Maybe about a week away, a week or so, a couple weeks away from NBA All-Star Weekend. How about the NBA doing what it does very cleverly, dropping its NBA Rivals Week fresh off of that. And then we got All-Star Weekend, on the horizon, man. It's just great opportunity for people to really capture the game at its fullest tilt. A lot of guys coming back from off of those injuries and stuff. It's just the timing is really good, man, because we are truly seeing a race when it comes to the Eastern and Western conferences collectively. And it's just awesome to see, man. So let me go around the red carpet to my right hand man's www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, my brother, Mr. Warren Shaw. What is good, my man? I gotta get your take, man. Were you feeling NBA Rivals Week? Do you think that this was a cleverly implemented means to pacify my desire, my love for what true NBA rivalry should mean?
I think that's really interesting because the NBA is often considered one of the more astute marketing leagues out there. And I think, as you alluded to in the outset, like All-Star is just a couple of weeks away. It made trade line, right before that as well too. So you just continue to build and build and build. So Rivals Week maybe allows you to feel like, hey, you know what? Hey, we're not up to par with our proverbial rival. We may need to get into this trade market next week and make a move to solidify, our team, our roster, and then All-Star and so forth and so forth. So, and what many people consider the dog days of the actual NBA season, because news is kind of maybe harder to come by. Now it's like it's all the stuff is trade conversation, and we're even going to follow that trend here on this week's show. But I think Rivals Week is something that we will continue to see. With it ending in some ways controversially, with the Celtics Lakers situation. For those who watched that game, I think they're like, yeah, for sure, we're going to continue to make this rock. Because then the Lakers Clippers played this week, the Knicks and Nets played over the weekend as well too. The two best centers went up against it, and Jokic and Embiid on that Saturday night tilt. So I think, they feel like it's a success. I don't know if fans feel that way, but I think the league definitely does. And we'll see what the ratings are going to tell us here in a couple of days here as well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the NBA continues to carry that momentum of what that should mean. Again, I think of rivals. I think of the team rivalry, the city rivalry. I think that, to me, in of its essence, elevates that. I did find it interesting that part of that NBA Rivals Week was, pitting the Brooklyn Nets versus the New York Knicks. What young rivalry?
I know.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know where you go with that, and that's where I'm saying sometimes I feel like there's an authenticity about the NBA Rivals Week, and I see that they're trying to find different angles of what they deem as far as the modern age rivalry in of itself. I think that's something that we should have a conversation, probably maybe in the off season, Shaw, when we're talking about what things are going to look like, for the 2023-24 season. It'll be very interesting to see. But the fact that this is what they've introduced to us, rolled out, promoted, so to speak, I'm at least glad that they're, understanding that part of what makes sports great is embracing traditional rivalries and giving it a platform for it to allow us to see the best of the best playing at each other when it's these two cities or these two teams who have a herald history and franchise that were the backbone of what made the NBA successful. It's good to see that they finally have embraced that again and have figured out a way to kind of put that out there on Front Street for us to be able to truly see it in the spotlight, so to speak.
Oh, I know you like that, man. You like the angsty stuff, bro. So
I'm
anything
about
that's
that,
a little
man.
angsty, yeah, you're about that life.
I'm about that life. Listen, we have got a great show on tap, guys. We are going to be highlighting the NBA All-Star starters, and we will give you our picks of who we deem to be the possible All-Star reserves. Shaw's we got a healthy selection to go from, and we may even highlight a couple of people that may have been deservedly scrubbed or snubbed. You know what I'm saying? My man Shaw ain't afraid to wax on that ass if he needs.
Whoa! No waxing. Settle down.
I mean, listen, I wax poetics. You.
Anyway.
All right, Mr. Miyagi, my bad. You must correct me. So anyway, we got a great show on tap, and Definitely going to get into a couple of the news and notes regarding trade rumors happening. As always, be sure to get my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA. Get at me at Gay Face Lead, the show's Twitter, and at NBA Baseline. You know where to find us. Just put the baseline in on whatever you use to listen to podcasts. And once you see us pop up, we've got, I'm saying, the best looking faces, the best looking anime faces out there in the game right now. So once you see us pop up, just add us on so we could be a go-to listening pleasure for the NBA. And as always, we rocks with the 19 Media Group. For those of you who catch us on YouTube as well, you know that you see the big 19 Media Group logo there. That means that's who our peoples, that's our fam. Be sure to check us out at www.19mediagroup.com. And you can also catch all of our previous episodes by going directly to www.thebaselinenba.com to catch us doing our thing. All right, Shaw. So let's quickly get right into some of the crux of some of the rumors that are still going around right now as we start nearing a little bit more towards the trade deadline. When we talk about, obviously, the big move has already been made by the Los Angeles Lakers, pulling in Rui Hachimura, and quickly you could see that it's already paid dividends. It'll be interesting to see how Darvin Ham utilizes Rui and how AD and LeBron have an influence on Rui's game moving forward. I think this is the best situation you could possibly have for a young guy who's obviously struggled to kind of find his footing as far as being among the conversational talks when it comes to the NBA. So him being out in LA, I think, has boded well for him.
Yeah, so far so good. A short time frame, and they look like they're going to re up on him already, or that's what they've said openly. They're not just making the move for right now; it's something for the future. And it gives them an opportunity to take a longer look at him. LeBron era, AD era, whatever you want to call it, and see how he can fit in without the pressure, if you will, kind of being the man, so to speak. So I think as a tertiary or even maybe fourth option, Rui's going to have some success there in LA. So Lakers will see if they're done. They claim to not be. They definitely want to make some more moves, but if this is the only thing that they're able to accomplish, after the before and after the trade deadline, then I wouldn't say it's a bad situation, and it definitely sets them on their path for hopefully some more success moving forward.
All right, out in Chicago, Shaw, multiple names are being bantered about as far as trade rumors go. Nikola Vucevic, Zach Lavine, Alex Caruso, Coby White. Does this mean, Shaw, that we're talking about the Chicago Bulls being sellers by the trade deadline?
Well, I think so. I think I've been indicating for it for a while, right? Weird vibes in Chicago, weird vibes, and they go on a couple winning streak, couple games, and they kind of get more weird vibes. Vucevic, as I alluded to, seems to be Switzerland, in their offense, where everybody seems to like Vuce on the team. But I just don't know. A lot of people don't consider him to be a winning player. So he's on an expiring deal. I think, an acquiring team, we're going to have to figure out what that looks like for them, what they want to keep and invest in him long term. And what is Chicago going to be asking back? The most ridiculous thing, though, that I've heard, and it was ironically, I was talking with some of our 19 media brethren, if you will, and former co-hosts on the Baseline, Jabari, now of iHeartMedia, iHeartRadio rather, and then Ricky Barnes, Late Night Lake Show. And they were talking about, Caruso is just he's undervalued or was undervalued as a Laker. And now we're seeing where it is. Chicago report comes out. Chicago might be trying to extract two first rounders for Alex Caruso, and he has a very, very affordable contract, roughly $9 million a year. And I think he's locked up for the next two. So if that's the market for Alex Caruso right now, I mean, that's live. So I think Chicago is definitely going to be looking to be sellers here, especially if the market is that high for some of their players.
I would love to see Alex Caruso somewhere else. And I think that if the value of him is because, again, teams are looking at things from an offensive perspective, well, then I challenge you, most of the top ended teams right now that, I think could use some extra defensive help from the backcourt situation, from the backcourt perspective. Like if you're a Boston Celtic, you know what I'm saying? But you're high on Pritchard. If you're the New York Knicks, can't tell me that you probably wouldn't want a guy like Alex Caruso backing up Jalen Brunson and the ability that he can alternate out of the 2-3, position to guard guys and still be a formidable point guard. It's interesting because then when we're talking about some of these teams, I think some of these teams are so quote unquote draft pick hoggish, right? They don't want to give up that much. But think about it, at $9 million, and you probably will give up some future picks. Alex Caruso, he ain't old. He ain't on the ladder, the back end of his career. So it'd be interesting to see who plays for that. It's interesting if the New York Knicks would talk more Alex Caruso than Zach Lavine, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, Lavine is stupid expensive. So
Right,
you're going to be.
exactly. But you know what's more interesting to me about this, Shaw, and before we, I know we got a couple other guys we gotta get into. It's interesting how we're saying that like people are looking at Vucevic more on the losing end of things than say like Zach Lavine, right? Like if I'm like the Portland Trailblazers, why would I not entertain getting a guy like Nikola Vucevic? You know what I'm saying? He's to me a much more legit rebounding big than you probably get with Jusuf Nurkic, who we're going to talk about in a moment with the Portland Trailblazers. And I'm just saying that like I don't see where Vucevic's game is considered still losing basketball with a guy that shoots the three. He may not be the greatest of defenders, but name me your MVP like candidates outside of Joel Embiid that are playing front court position basketball that are among your greatest defenders. You know what I'm saying? They're usually role players, and the guys can still give you 20 points per game, can still give you double-digit rebounds if you maybe put more emphasis on him doing that. It's just interesting to me that suddenly his stock level as compared to being put onto a team is labeled more losing basketball than you would be looking at what he can really bring to the table that I think could be winning basketball.
I think it's labeled based on who he's playing around. So he
Yeah.
can't be the centerpiece in any capacity of a franchise that was proven in Orlando. And now even with higher caliber talent in Chicago, they're still not where a lot of people thought they'd be. So people are thinking about trying to reduce Vucevic's overall role. So that's where I think that moniker comes from. Not that he doesn't put up statistical numbers, but the whole adage empty calories. And can he kind of get you over the top if you have him in a higher position in terms of like your hierarchy in terms of roster construction?
Well, for those who raise that thought, I raise you a Brooke Lopez, and you tell me why teams can't get it done. Right? That's all that I'm saying. Brooke Lopez, that right then and there of in itself. And yes, you're playing next to a guy like Giannis, but a guy like Giannis affords a guy like Brooke Lopez to quote unquote change his game. So it works for the greater good of the team, and that's why they're holding up a chip, and that's why you've probably seen the best season that you've ever seen from Brooke Lopez this upcoming season. This season right now. So interesting. All right, out in Portland, Shaw, Jusuf Nurkic. We were just mentioning about him, Josh Hart. Those are guys being bantered about. I think it's long overdue. As much as I love the idea that Nurkic is a great player and stuff like that, I've always said I'm finding it hard when it was McCollum and Lillard and Nurkic, and even now if it's Lillard and Nurkic, something has got to give. I think you need something a little more dynamic next to Lillard at that front court position for the Portland Trailblazers to sustain or even be able to leapfrog even some of the other teams that are right now ahead of them in the Western Conference.
Well, clearly they feel the same way. At least they're going to kick the tires on it. He's got what 16, 18, and $19 million over the next 3 years. So, $70 million total on his contract, including the 15 on this year. I mean, Nurkic he's more than adequate. He's more than even a serviceable center. He's a good center, but not, I think, in the way that it's working for what Portland wanted. So they started off the year looking really well. The Jeremy Grant situation had been pretty good for them as well too. He's on an expiring. They got to figure that out. Josh Hart has a 2-year deal, player option, I think next year. So I think they're just realizing like, hey, we're not as good as we wanted to be. Let's see what's out there. And I think the Nurkic thing is not a definite. It's just something that they're going to investigate to see if there are any takers and can they bring back any equity, maybe clear some cap space to maybe even re-sign Jeremy Grant, in the offseason.
All right, out in New Orleans, Shaw. A few names that are being thrown out there: Jaxson Hayes, Devonte Graham, Naji Marshall. I'm a little surprised that the Pelicans are looking to move some of these guys. Like, while I understand if you're the New Orleans Pelicans, you definitely have to be buyers. So I can understand if maybe the idea here is there's a lot of upside with throwing these names out there because these are good players. It's just hard to imagine that they're good players, but not good enough to be able to find footing on this roster. And to me, obviously, it means that they're looking for much more high-end talent to complement what's already going on there because Willie Green can't find a place for these three guys, which, again, I'm surprised by because we've spoken about how these guys in many circumstances have fit in quite nicely while some of their top tier players have been on the mend.
Yeah, I mean, the only name that's a little surprising to me is maybe Najee Marshall. I think Hayes, there's not room for him on the roster with Valanciunas. Assuming Zion comes back, he ends up actually playing some small ball five at times, but some of their most effective lineups is when Larry Nance is out there playing small ball five. So then where does that leave Jaxson Hayes, especially as a guy who can't really space the floor? He's more of an energy type big. So if they're able to extract something from him, then, it puts him probably in a better situation. Devonte Graham kind of also just falling out of the rotation, especially with the acquisition of CJ McCollum last year. Just really not a whole lot of wiggle for him. So he gets spot minutes. He does okay in that time. I think that, again, the more interesting name is Naji Marshall. I feel like, has really done a great job, especially this season when Zion's been out, to potentially be giving up on him seems a little bit early, but I don't know that they're going to do that. I think you're going to have to offer a pretty significant package, but Hayes and Graham, rather, I can definitely see potentially moving on at the deadline.
But again, I think that's maybe to what you're saying, Shaw, that I don't know if it's so much as that they've given up on him as much as they know that this is a guy that I think strike while the iron's hot, that if we're going to look to go and get something back in return, and maybe moving Hayes and Graham seems plausible, maybe kind of, reading the temperature and seeing what teams are really willing to give up because of the fact that there's so much upside for Marshall, that maybe it might be, too good to not, take into consideration, given what
Herb Jones, Ingram, like all those guys are kind of ahead of him, and obviously Zion himself. So it becomes, again, they just have too many, in some ways, quality type guys, and they have to do some sort of consolidation trade, like similar to what Atlanta has done over the last couple of years, although hasn't worked out well for them just yet.
Yes, yet. All right, and Shaw in Orlando, Mo Bamba, Gary Harris, Terrence Ross, RJ Hampton. A few of these names, yeah, we already knew that this was going to happen. I got to tell you, man, the fact that we're not even entertaining the idea of maybe Jonathan Isaac being thrown into this mix surprises me a little bit, right? Like, if you're the Orlando Magic, I definitely think you should definitely be sellers, because of the fact that I think you know what you have with Boncaro. And I think you're starting to figure things out. If you buy into Cole Anthony, and you got Suggs, I think the time is now for you to look at some of these younger guys and start moving them, especially the ones who you've obviously failed in being able to keep either on the basketball court or failed to get anything out of over the last few years. So it surprises me that Isaac is not in this conversation.
Well, again, just, based on reports, and I think if I'm Orlando, it's one of those situations like you've invested the 2 years in his rehab. You're the ones who kind of built him back up, and he's just now getting back. So either way, if you were trying to move him now, you're trading pennies on the dollar. You wouldn't be able to get high value for him because he hasn't shown anything, because he's just been out, and you've put the time to try to get him back up with the rehab side. So, you want to see some sort of ROI on your investment. And even if that means holding on to him for an additional year for him to build his trade equity, that's why you're not going to see his name mentioned this year. I was surprised when they re-signed Mo Bamba in the offseason anyway, knowing that they had Isaac in the wings, drafting Boncaro, re-signing or having Wendell Carter Jr. there as well, too. Just same thing. Very similar consolidation trade. They have a lot of guys who play very similar positions that I think some teams are going to have some interest in. So Bamba is a name that I think, anybody like from Miami to Boston, people like that could very much be looking for, looking to fill that 4 or 5 situation with a guy who can block shots, shoot the three, et cetera, et cetera. He could be a very, very interesting piece moved on a somewhat decent deal, at the deadline. And Gary Harris, Terrence Ross, all those guys have been mentioned, kind of years over years over years.
Years over years over years. Yada 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 yada.
Yeah, man. Same old story.
All right, man. So great conversation, Shaw. And obviously, we still need to keep our eyes focused on what's taking place over the next few weeks, because when trade deadline times, we're hoping some of these names are actually going to be part of the, part of the wire conversation in being moved. So more ahead, and definitely cannot be overlooked. It's how quickly things will change probably in the next couple of weeks. You're tuned to The Baseline. Kyle Lee Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Coming up, it's breakdown time. You know what that means. We get a little bit of discussion regarding the All-Star starters, and then we'll also give you our picks of who we think are deservedly going to be the reserves. It's going to be a really interesting conversation to be had, so you don't want to miss out here on The Baseline. Time to break it down to the bone gristle. Time now for the breakdown. Kyle Lee Warrenshaw, Baseline NBA podcast. And getting around that time, man, NBA All-Star Weekend. And we have now our selections for the NBA All-Star starters. We'll start off in the Eastern Conference, the starting pool. Kevin Durant, 13-time NBA All-Star. He's in. Kyrie Irving, 8-time All-Star. He's in. Jason Tatum, 4-time All-Star. He's in. Donovan Mitchell, 4 times All-Star. He is in, and the captain for the Eastern Conference, or for the team, so to speak, that will be comprised, because the rules have changed. They will now be drafting out of both the East and Western starters. Giannis Antetokounmpo is one of those captains. Shaw, what do we make about the Eastern starters pool? Are we feeling it? Is there a snub in place?
I mean, the biggest omission is obviously Joel Embiid. So I just think, when you look at that forward lineup, it's it's tough. So like, who do you take out? KD, Giannis, or Tatum? Who qualify as front court players. So I think,
Then you
at the
take
end
out
of the day,
Durant.
that's just the biggest issue from the starter standpoint. Yeah.
You take out Durant. Look, man. Again, I'm not saying that Kevin Durant is not an all-star. He's a star. He's an all-star, and yes, he could very much be a starter. Me personally, if you're gonna say Giannis Antetokounmpo is the captain and he's got to select, you should be able to basically indicate them as saying these guys are there, and whoever the captain selects they're their starters. You shouldn't even label these guys as starters. Because I guarantee you that Giannis will probably be like, you know what, I'm going to pick Embiid anyway. I think I want to start next to Embiid rather than Kevin Durant. Durant and Giannis play of the same, right? It's just, again, this is semantics. But if you're telling me that you had to replace someone, Embiid played more games than Durant. Okay, Embiid is the NBA leading scorer right now. I don't get it. I just don't get it.
Well, I mean, again, I think it's arguable. Obviously, KD was hooping, at a monumental level, and
Agree.
Tatum was the one who actually kind of came back. He said, "Hey, he didn't think he was going to start after the first couple of results." So he's like, "Hey, the East is tough at my position, and if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen." I think people feel like it's more egregious that Embiid isn't starting than it is that Durant is. So I kind of just wonder, like, if it were to have fallen to Tatum or Durant, obviously Giannis was going to get there anyway. I just don't know where people would have more outrage, but I think at this point, Embiid will still be an all-star regardless. But as in terms of the starting standpoint, then yeah, it was probably the most glaring omission on either side.
But I think you know what, Shaw, this to me speaks to the misguided vanity of the NBA. Like this part of it right here. This is why you don't label this like. I don't even know where to go with this, because it will get completely away from the whole point of our show in doing this. But I'm just saying this is definitely going to have to be a conversation about how this is such a big miss on the NBA's part. I don't even think the NBA should be really involved in the idea of determining like the starters, so to speak. I think that should be either determined whether it be the coaches or the players, whoever it is. But it should be, you shouldn't be labeling these dudes. You should just be acknowledging who your all-stars are. And from there, they select who they want to start with. And they're your starters. You get what I'm saying? Because we're so far gone from not legitimizing these guys. All of them literally are starters in any NBA all-star game, right? So that's the reason why I don't even understand the logic of this. It's like that. It's just totally, because you can make the argument, oh, what, Jaylen Brown doesn't deserve to be a starter, right? Like if you're putting together a team that's going to compete against another team or whatever, I'm going with the guys that I want to roll with to start with. They should be your starters. So, again, they're hedging their bets, and I think it's gonna fly in the face of what it is that they're doing, and it's gonna put the NBA again in a really awkward spot. And I don't think it's something that warrants a good look, so to speak, on the NBA and how they acknowledge all stars and starters and things of that nature. Let's go ahead and focus our attention over to the West. Out in the West, Steph Curry, 9-time All-Star, Luka Doncic, 4-time All-Star, Nikola Jokic, 5-time All-Star, Zion, two-time All-Star, and the GOAT, LeBron James, 9 times All-Star. I'm just
Yeah, no, I mean,
heaven forbid, like when he breaks the freaking Kareem Abdul-Jabbar record, like,
wow,
Jesus.
he's locked in for sure. I think the biggest thing here is just the Zion piece, because obviously of all the games missed. So I think that's where, almost to your previous point, is all right. Well, is this the popularity game or the All-Star game? And while Zion is on the cusp of becoming, maybe generational, so to speak, he hasn't been able to stay healthy, and that has been proven again this year. So, but the fans want to see him out there, and ironically, he might, he might play like the game before, the All-Star break, just so that he can play in the All-Star game, which I don't know. I think, he's got to worry about his health, especially since New Orleans has a chance to kind of do something this year. So that is probably the most glaring situation there. And it didn't allow for some others in the West, which is still obviously very deep to kind of get in there. But I think from a fan standpoint, Zion makes a lot of sense for them because again, he's just a big name, in a market that is, well, I wouldn't say rising, but he's putting that market on the map simply by his his sheer athleticism alone.
All right, listen, I completely agree with you 100% where you're coming from. And again, this idea, look, even you could have even made the argument Steph Curry, right? Because when he got injured, for how long he got injured, with the number of other guards, like Ja Morant should probably be there, right? I'm not saying that Steph Curry isn't deserving. I'm not saying that he shouldn't be a starter. I'm just saying that, like, this is out of circumstance that we're saying he automatically was in just simply because it's Steph Curry, because of what Steph Curry was doing prior to the injury. But hey, there were other guys that were out there that were playing, that didn't get injured, that were putting up equal numbers as some of these guys that are part of the starting pool. So the idea that we're just suddenly omitting them, so to speak, for the purposes of the starting pool, I think is just absolutely asinine. Because we already know that if they're not going to be starters, they're going to automatically be reserves, who we're going to talk about right now.
Yes, sir.
All right. So let's go ahead and shift our focus, Shaw, to the all-star reserves. All right. Out in the West, Shaw, we have a very healthy crop of players to choose from. All right. SGA, Ja Morant, Domantas Sabonis, Lauri Markkanen, Aaron Gordon, Damian Lillard, Anthony Edwards. We obviously feel like there's some names that haven't got mentioned. So I'm sure for our Lakers fans, what happened to AD? And for our Kings fans, De'Aaron Fox, right? And for our Phoenix Suns fans, Devin Booker, or if you're a Clippers fan, Paul George. Shaw, let's start it off. Why is it that we probably won't see some of those guys and very much should see some of the guys that we mentioned should be deserved to be reserves?
Yeah, so I think SJ is a lock. I think Ja's a lock. I think Sabonis and Markkanen are locks. Where it gets dicey is in that last forward spot and the quote unquote 2 wild cards. So for those who are maybe uninitiated, the All-Star voting reserve you have to have 2 guards, 3 forwards, and then 2 wild card spots. So basically any position. Dame is averaging 30 a game, and he's Dame. So in that wild card spot, I think he probably is gonna get there. I think Anthony Edwards has done so much of the heavy lifting for Minnesota, despite them maybe having somewhat of a disappointing season, that he has to get there. But that would leave a guy like De'Aaron Fox, who's been mostly healthy, compared to the other guys who I'm putting on the snub list, Anthony Davis, Paul George, and Devin Booker. Fox and the Sacramento Kings, in the upper echelon of the Western Conference in a way that we just didn't potentially expect. So if you were to sub De'Aaron Fox with Anthony Edwards, I could see that. And I think the other thing is, just how the reserve voting usually goes, like they like to have the teams with the best records in there. So Aaron Gordon, did the Nuggets deserve two All-Stars? Jaren Jackson Jr. could be another name that you throw into that situation, from Memphis, with the Memphis and Denver being kind of at the top of the Western Conference. AD is obviously the clearest Hall of Fame talent of all of those players, but he's missed so many games. So that third forward is really, really tough. So I don't know if you just go ahead and do that, and then maybe you kick out one of the guards, and maybe Edwards and Fox both don't make it because you got to put AD and Edwards, or AD and Gordon, and AD or Jaren Jackson. I don't know, but I'm just going from the standpoint, hey, who's been available? Aaron Gordon's been available. Anthony Edwards has been hooping. So I think my biggest snub is actually De'Aaron Fox, but everybody else should be locks.
I agree with you. And I really think that this is part of where that conversation should be had about, what should be more important, the notability versus the availability. Because there's a couple of guys on here that I really think, like, outside of the fact that they're being mentioned because of their notability, that the availability, I think, has compromised them in this narrow focus about this year's all-star team. Right. And, one other thing too, Shaw, I really want, if you really want to legitimize the NBA All-Star weekend, and you have guys that are playing in markets that don't typically have guys that are all-star caliber players, this is a great opportunity for you to introduce people to not just that market, but also the people of that market to what else is out there, and really match them up with the rest of what the other guys are doing in the bigger markets. So I would love to see the Lauri Markkanens and the SGAs and the Aaron Gordons, because I don't know if you're going to see another opportunity or time for them to do what they're showing you this year. Maybe this is a stepping stone. Maybe this is like the best is yet to come. But they have entered themselves into the conversation and should be deserved of so. So when things like being injured is not being taken into consideration when you see the type of numbers that Gordon is putting up. To me, they're comparably better than what Anthony Davis is. Yeah, when Anthony Davis comes in, and he does those numbers. But Aaron Gordon comes in doing those numbers and has been on the court doing them throughout the course of the first half of this season. So to me, he should be a lock. I don't even think it should be a question. I don't think guys like Devonte Sabonis should be on the cusp of these type of things because those numbers have proven they've been doing it sustainably longer than some of the other guys that are out there. So it'll be very interesting to see. I think the backcourt is where we're going to keep a very close eye about the snubbery, quote unquote, that goes on. You know what I'm saying? And guys like Anthony Edwards that are hybrids, if whether or not those numbers should play themselves into, well, we can't get them in the front, so we'll get them in the back. You know what I'm saying? Like that to me is where it becomes very interesting. But it will be a crime to see guys like SGA and guys like Anthony Edwards not being heavily considered. Guys like Lauri Markkanen not being heavily considered should be automatic locks because you're trying to sneak guys in like Booker and Paul George in the back door or Anthony Davis in the back door because of their notability and not because of their availability.
Yeah, my final caveat will be this: like, there's a chance that if Gordon doesn't get voted in by the coaches, then that probably is going to go to AD. Again, I'm just going off what I think, or collectively you and I think it should potentially be.
Mm-hmm.
Then I don't know if Zion is even going to be healthy. Like we said, like he's going to have to play before All-Star to even be able to play in the All-Star game itself. So then it doesn't open up a spot, wild card or otherwise, for a guy like De'Aaron Fox or Anthony Edwards. I think those are the two kind of final spots there, 3 spots, I guess, really, that we're just not kind of sure of. Between AD, Gordon, Edwards, and Fox, like it's really it's a toss up between those. And it's going to be a matter of preference.
Absolutely. All right. Coming up, Sean and I will break down the East reserves. Snubbery in the West. We got an equilibrium, baby. Snubbery in the East. We'll definitely get into that conversation here on The Baseline.
This awesome show that you are listening to is sponsored by Rich Kid Money Bear Clothing. The Bronx-based company represents 1990s streetwear with a modern twist. Rich Kid offers high-end quality clothing at reasonable prices. They have t-shirts, hoodies, sweatsuits, and more for men, women, and kids like me. You can check them out at richkidmoneybear.com and you can use the code 19media for a 15% discount. Okay, back to the show. And as always, this is a 19 Media Group presentation.
We are back. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA podcast, and our conversation to break down all-star star selections. And we're giving you our perspective of who we see being locks in for the Eastern Conference and Western Conference reserves, respectively. So let's go ahead and focus our attention over to the East, Shaw. Out in the East, our selections should be Tyrese Halliburton, Jaylen Brown, Joel Embiid, Pascal Siakam, Julius Randle, Trae Young, Bam Adebayo. We believe that the snubbery may come into play with guys like Butler, DeRozan, Darius Garland, Drew Holiday, and Jalen Brunson. Partly because we believe that it's a very heavy guarded class of quality players that should be taken into consideration. But nonetheless, this is exactly what's making it very challenging when it comes to the selections. So where is it that you feel, how confident do you feel about this being the overall selection of players, including the 2 wild cards that we believe should be representing the East?
Yeah, this one is tougher for me, honestly. When I thought the West was challenging as in that of itself. I think Halliburton is he's obviously one of the candidates for most improved, 20-10 guy, but coming off of injury, should be back, a couple games should be for the All-Star. And I think that will solidify his case. Jaylen Brown's no-brainer. Joel Embiid's a no-brainer. Siakam has been putting up like SGA type numbers in terms of like just how crazy they have been. While he's not averaging 30 games, like 25, 8, and 6 or something like that too, I think this year for Siakam. So insane numbers, but the Raptors are not winning games. I think he gets in there. I think you have to put a Nick. So then you're splitting hairs between Julius Randle and Jalen Brunson. So I just kind of with Randle as the guy who's been there before and kind of what I think the coaches are going to go with as well. The questions then become Trae Young, because the Hawks have eked their way over 500 currently. He's at like what 28, 29 a game or something like that, and maybe not quite that much, but almost 10 assists. So it's kind of saying, well, damn, the numbers speak to him being there while the success isn't quite there, and the Heat have started to turn things around. And a lot of that has been Bam Adebayo, who's been primarily the most consistent and most available Heat player. So you end up snubbing, or I end up snubbing, Drew Holiday, and you think the Bucks are one of the obviously 2 or 3 best teams in the Western Conference. They should probably have, 2 All-Stars on there. So I don't know if that comes at the expense of Trae Young. I can't imagine it comes at the expense of Halliburton. But I think Holiday probably has the biggest chance of those snubs that we mentioned to potentially actually get on this team. But one, obviously somebody would have to go. And I just don't know if that they'll give 2 Knicks an opportunity, especially since the Holiday situation is as volatile as it is. I don't think the Butler and DeRozan cases are as strong to boot anybody else off the roster, even Siakam on a losing team.
I think the most interesting will probably be how they select the wild cards, because you have a guard, and then you also have a front court player, I'm presuming, correct?
Yeah, I that's what I would select right now. I went with Trae Young and Bam Adebayo as kind of like the wild cards.
I'm not gonna lie to you, Shaw. I almost feel like the wild card is going to be the most difficult in comparison to what we're looking at as far as who should rightfully be the reserves. I don't think you missed on anything in regards to your argument regarding Tyrese Halliburton. I think the only thing in question is, are they prepared to give good on what Tyrese Halliburton has shown you? And to your point, like, he's like among one of them, he's a front runner for most improved. So I don't understand like how he should not be inclusive of that. It would be interesting to me because I feel like they may slight the Indiana Pacers, because that's just the level of disrespect that tends to happen with small market teams, and this becomes a wild card scenario rather than him just being an outright, reserve starter, right? Being outright reserve.
Let me interject really quickly though. So I think where the coaches are going to have the issue here is like, how much do you want to actually reward winning versus like just kind of the crazy numbers that are being played. So the Pacers have slipped some now. So now they are under 500, and he's been out. So you can honestly say that hasn't been his fault, because they've been losing a lot of games while he's been out of the lineup, right? Then I think if you take it to the Trae Young side, so 27 and 9.9, those numbers are gaudy. But have they been impactful? Do you feel, again, are those empty calories? So I'd even ask you, from those 3 guards, right? So, those 2 guards, Tyrese, Trae Young, and now I think you have to throw Drew Holiday into that situation, because Milwaukee's just really good, and Drew Holiday has been hooping, especially in the games that Giannis has missed.
Exactly.
Which 2 of those 3 would you take? Because Jaylen Brown, like, he's in there regardless, right? But you have to take 2 of those 3 guards, Tyrese, Trae, and Drew Holiday. Which 2 of those 3 you're taking? Who are you leaving out?
I'm taking Drew. I'm taking Drew. You're saying 2 of the 3 or just 1?
Yeah, 2 of the 3.
2 or 3. I'm taking Drew, and I'm taking Tyrese Halliburton.
Okay.
Like,
right,
and
so
again,
Young's out of there.
I don't know. I'm not saying that Young is not having a statistically all-star worthy season, but I am saying that in the comparison of the other guards, right? And I think that's where the miss is too. What else are we attributing to what being an all-star means? Is it just because you're putting up numbers, or is it because of what your all-around play is impacting the teams that you're playing for as well too? So even defensive metrics, even, when the superstar of that team is in there and you come in, I'll make the argument, Shaw, that Jalen Brunson has been more valuable for than what Trae Young is basically offering. I think that you can make the argument that Dejounte Murray has alleviated some of those things. That doesn't mean that Young is not deserving. I'm just saying now the pool is much heavier.
It is, and that's without even taking
a lot more than just saying, oh yeah, he's just putting up those spectacular numbers.
But hold on though, I mean, but that's and we just kind of dismissed, or I did, just kind of dismiss Darius Garland, right? And the Cavs are a top 4 team. He's averaging 22 and 8. And had some really heavy statistical input and impact, I think, on the Cavs season as well. Yeah. So the guard situation in the East is really, really difficult. And I think in some ways, while Garland made it last year and Trae Young's made it the last couple of years, Trae Young probably has maybe the weakest case just by virtue of overall impact, and even in relative to what we thought Atlanta was going to be. So I think it's going to be really tough between, again, yeah, I wish I'm wrong to not include Garland into that situation. So you have basically 4 or 5 guards for basically 2 spots,
Exactly.
and it's going to be really tough to
and
get
look,
that in there.
and Darius Garland, I think, has been more consistent, so to speak, than say Jalen Brunson. But I mean, if you look at the numbers over the last almost 4 weeks now, Jalen Brunson has been putting up some damn gaudy numbers. Okay,
yeah.
he's on another level right now. Okay, and you and with him and Julius Randle, it's the only reason why the New York Knicks are even above 500. All right. My thing is that's why I think the outlier is going to be that wild card. And how do you make that comparison? It's not that you don't validate putting Bam Adebayo as one of them. I'm just saying they may go guards. They may go hard. They just 2 guard up and just roll with what they've got for their bigs. So unless the idea is you want to get 1 big and you want to get 1 guard, you know what I'm saying?
So I'm going to ask you another hard question.
Yeah.
If you have to pick between Randle and Brunson, one Nick goes?
Randle.
All right.
Randle's been the more consistent. He's been the more consistently reliable, more valuable player with the way that he's played for the New York Knicks through the course of the year. That does not just, does not negate. But Brunson had, he had to come on. I think he came off of that injury. When he came off that injury is when he started catching fire. And that was really already, they were 3-4 weeks into the season.
All right. So, all right. Well, then I think then we're more or less the line here. I think, the only thing we would do is then, from the original list, we would take out Trae Young and put in Drew Holiday if I'm gathering, what you're saying, correctly. And then Trae Young becomes a snub instead of Drew Holiday,
right.
And then Garland.
You know how narrow this gap is, Shaw? I'm saying put in Drew Holiday. You even reintroduced the argument, say, you know what? I would not be surprised if Darius Garland or Jalen Brunson would have been considered, because given what they have shown you in different ways, that to me, I feel like what we got from Garland and Brunson is the makeup of what I've seen from Drew Holiday this particular season for what he's been doing for the Milwaukee Bucks. And the one thing that you have to highlight as well, too, Shaw, this is mainly because, and I'm not saying it's not a consideration that they have to take in. I'm saying from what we're looking at, Middleton not being in there, I think has allowed us to really look at and see how valuably important Drew Holiday has been, and the fact that he stepped up and put those numbers together because of not just the inconsistencies, but the inavailability of Middleton has afforded him to. And I think sometimes you look at it within the scope of the NBA season, you say to yourself, damn, for this year, it's hard for us to not acknowledge what Holiday is doing, that he should not be inserted into that. Maybe next year, we're not going to see this again because his role will then eventually change again, and it will discount him. But I think for this year, it should really be counted.
Yeah. So I think if we're, again, recapping it here, maybe a little bit of musical chairs, but the only locks are Jaylen Brown and Joel Embiid. Everything else you can make an argument for, even Tyrese Halliburton. You're like, all right, well, maybe. I think he's going to be in there. We could do, from our original list, we could play musical chairs if you didn't feel like Siakam was deserving, especially being on a sub 500 team. You can make Bam Adebayo the third forward, and then that allows you to have 2 guards as your wild card spot if you took Siakam out of that situation, because they're not winning despite his statistical impact. So the East is going to be a lot of fun. So I can't wait to hear what people have to say about that one, because I think there's going to be a lot of people in their hurt feelings. Heat Nation is going to be mad if Bam and Jimmy Butler don't make it. There's going to be some people clamoring for even Tyler Hero to be on there, despite how many games he's missed as well. And then obviously the Bucks with Drew Holiday, Cavs, Darius Garland. Even the Bulls with DeMar DeRozan, and he's played too. So this one's a little bit harder than the West to me, but a lot of fun to discuss.
Absolutely, man. And great overall conversations. And we want to hear from you guys. We want to know, are you feeling where we're saying is a possible snubbery that will take place? Whether it be in the West or the East. Are you feeling who we believe are going to be the selections for the Eastern reserves and also for the Western reserves? So don't hesitate to weigh in and give us perspective about where you see the rest of the all-star landscape falling. You know what I'm saying? We're building conversations, but let it not be said, the NBA likes to build up controversy. So, my man Shaw, once again, awesome show this week, man. Good convo. Opening up the floodgates yet again in a nice way. in a nice way.
In a nice way. And so hopefully, fans, listeners will tap in with us, give us your thoughts. Who we just outraged that we left off the All-Star reserve list, and then we'll compare that to what the coaches actually do on Thursday. And what is your criteria? Do you like for your All-Stars to have a winning record, or are you just looking for the guys who put up the most statistical crazy numbers, or who are just going to put on a show, when it comes to watching that game on Sunday? So not all of those things always coalesce and match up in the same way that you might think. So again, I think that's what makes it such a great topic, man. But can't wait for the trade deadline here, just now, the week or so away. Man, basketball is giving what it needs to give, as the kids say.
Yeah, man. The NBA is alive and kicking, and it couldn't come at a better time. Once again, we'd like to thank you and yours for hopping on board with us this week for The Baseline. Callie, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do.